Good morning. Welcome this Wednesday, October the 5th, and we'll be discussing the 17th Sunday after Trinity for the one-year series and looking at the readings that are coming up for that. These readings are not going to be our readings this Sunday. We're going to have different readings for the celebration of the ordination. We'll be using the readings from that. And you'll have a different preacher. I don't know if I should probably send something out so people know. Maybe more people will come if you have a different preacher. Pastor Foisey, a good friend of mine from Nebraska, will be preaching, and he'll be preaching on all the texts. But all the texts are really, really short. So anyway, so these readings we're not going to hear on Sunday. The Psalm, I'm moving that one back 1 week. So I will be preaching on this Psalm, I believe. Let me make sure. I will be preaching on this Psalm, I think, not this Sunday, but that following Sunday, October the 17th. Let's see, 16th. Yes. So I'll be doing Psalm 2 next time. So any guesses on the picture, what the story is? I doubt you'll guess it, but I just thought I'd throw it out. What kind of stands out in the picture? Obviously Jesus there in the center, but what else stands out? And the painter kind of gives you a clue. The what? Looking at some kind of feast. Yeah, he's sitting there. Why do you say crippled? And you're not wrong. I'm just trying to. Okay. Shriveled. Okay. Yeah, it's nothing with his hands, but you did the feet. Notice the legs. What's with the legs? No, he's got two legs. There's one. There's like his garment kind of goes over here, but then here's his toes from the other leg, and the leg goes up here. But just looking at this one leg, and it's swollen. Yeah, it's pretty big. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on, and we'll see what our psalm is Psalm 2, and the Lutheran Study Bible outlines it this way. I always like using that as a start. They do a pretty good job of most outlines. Nations oppose the Lord, the Father, and then the Father, the Lord, establishes his king, and then the sons rule, and then there's a warning. And so that's kind of the so nations opposing the Lord. That never happens anywhere. And John Kleinig, my favorite guy, there he is, from Australia. He has this to say about Psalms 1 and 2. He says Psalms 1 and 2 are kind of an introduction to the whole book of Psalms. And their connection, that they lack titles before collection of the prayers of David. Because most of the ones 3 to 72 are prayers of David. And so many people think that Psalm 1 and 2 are of David because of that. One psalm in Acts 13:33. I'm not sure what that means. I'm going to leave that off. Verbal links. So you're going to see blessed in both psalms. You see meditate in both psalms. You see mock, wicked, and the way. All those words are in both of those first two psalms. And their instruction on the purpose of the Psalter, they're to teach that true happiness is found in the Lord and his teaching. Psalm 1 is, blessed are those who meditate on the law of the Lord. They do not walk in the, which one I'm talking about? Which psalm? Psalm 1? One of my favorite psalms. And it goes like this. I can get it up here quick enough. Psalm 1. Blessed is the man, come on, who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor in the way of the nor in the stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffer, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. And so the teaching of the Lord, that's leads to happiness. That leads to a blessed life, blessed being happy. To help the righteous to meditate on the Lord's instruction with psalms of lament and psalms of praise. They also show that they call on nations to worship the Lord and submit to his messianic king. I'm gonna skip through this because there's a lot we're gonna have to cover, and this is a little bit. So here's what he has to say about Psalm 2. The report of the Lord's reaction to the rebellion of the nations. This is verses 1 to 6. The nations are going to rebel against God. And they're just going to start with a complaint about the rebellion of the kings against the Lord. That's verses 1 to 3. Their conspiracy, verses 1 and 2. And their decision is to reject the rule of the Lord. And then the Lord is going to respond to their complaint or their words. And his response in verses 4 and 5 is he's going to disdain them, wrath against them. And then he's going to give an oracle about the installation of the king on Zion. And then there's going to be the Lord's mandate to the Davidic king. And this is one of the coolest sections, in that you get to see what's happening in a conversation between God the Father and God the Son, or God the Son and God the Father. It's a conversation between the two of them. We don't get to see that very often. And so there's the king's announcement of the Lord's decree. That's Jesus talking about the Father's decree, because the Father gave a decree here in verse 6. Then Jesus is going to talk about it. And then the Lord's going to commission Jesus. The Father's going to commission Jesus and adopt him as his son and offer him international rule. He's going to offer him all the kingdoms. And then after that, then it goes back to the nations. And rather than the nations rebelling against the Lord gives an ultimatum to the nations. He calls for their attention to instruction, and he summons them to serve the Lord and submit to his Son. And then the psalm ends with a congratulation of those who take refuge in the King. Sounds complicated, but it's going to be really simple. Yeah, good question. How do we know this stuff? How do we know about creation? You ever thought about that before? The 6 days of creation. How do we know that? No one was there. Yeah, the Bible is inspired by God, and that God gave David these words. And oftentimes we see right that those all have they have the name of David, of David, of David. And so many think that because these first two are an introduction to it all, that they just left that of David off, but it is of David. And I'm going out on a limb. Yep, and I'm going out on a limb here, and we'll see as we go, and I'll let you know if I feel comfortable out on that limb or not by the end. But the limb is this, that David oftentimes is a preview, a figure of Jesus, right? That Jesus is David's greater son, right? That David is Jesus is the greater David. And so I'm wondering, and this is the limb I'm on, is that this psalm could be spoken of David first, but ultimately showing us about the greater David. That makes sense? And I want to point you to the greater David more importantly than to David. So we'll see if it works. Good question, Bonnie. So the first strophe, or the first section, is going to deal with the bitter opposition of the enemies to the Lord's anointed, the king. The second is going to describe the calm assurance of the Lord himself in the face of this opposition. Then the third part is going to present a glorious divine ordinance appointed for the Lord's anointed. And then the last is going to give an exhortation to the rebels to submit discreetly to him who is their Lord. That kind of makes sense. They want to rebel. The Lord says, no, you don't want to do that. And then he sets his king, and then he says, listen, you better follow my way, and blessed are those that do. Here's the psalm. This first part probably is spoken by a court official, or likely a royal prophet, or the writer himself, maybe David. And they say this: why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against who? The Lord and his anointed. Would that be David? Could be David. And also the anointed, the Christos of the Lord, or the Mashiach of the Lord. That would also be Jesus. Saying, and here's, so they're plotting, verses 1 and 2. Then verse 3, you get what they say. Here's what they're saying: let us burst their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. That this king, this God, he is just too confining. It's like we're his slaves, and he's got us bound, and we want what? Freedom. We want to burst those bonds away. We want to take the cords, get rid of them. We don't want to be tied down by him anymore, whether that's the King David or the king, the ultimate Messiah, Jesus. Okay, so that's the rebellion. Are there kings like that and people like that today? Yeah. Just today on a podcast I listened to on religion and news and that kind of stuff, they were talking about in Australia, there was a executive who is well known as a good executive, and the Australian football, not American football. Natalie plays Australian football. I don't know if you knew that, or she used to play it, and her family's big into it. Went and saw them play, and it's a different kind of game. Anyway, Australian football, they're one team, they're the most famous team in the land. Their coach left or was removed or whatever, or not their coach, their coach, no, owner, president. Anyway, he was removed or left, whatever, and they hired this other guy, this good executive. And shortly after he was hired, real shortly after he was hired, they fired him. And the reason they fired him is there became an outcry because this guy belonged to a church and was the chairman of the church. And that church, a pastor 10 years ago or quite a while back, had preached a sermon about homosexuality. And so since that church was against homosexuality and that kind of thing, and because he was the chairman of that congregation, they said, you can't be the president because you're the church that you're part of. And they removed him. Crazy. I'll stop there. But you see nations, you see even our nation is coming against Christianity and against Christians, against the Lord. And how do they do it? They go against his anointed ones, his ones that he chooses to lead. And ultimately, the anointed one is Jesus, and we'll see that. What's God's response? I love this. He who sits in the heavens, God, the Father, the Lord, he holds them in derision. And then he will speak to them in his fury and terrify them in his fury, saying, as for me, I've set my king on Zion, my holy hill. So what's God's response when they say, let's throw off our things? We don't want to be God's. He laughs. He holds them in derision. What's that mean, to laugh at them? Yeah, no respect for what they're saying. No concern. I mean, it's like, really? That's what you want to try and do? It's like he's not worried because he's in charge. He's the Lord, and his will happen. And if they want to fight against him, then that's fine. And so then he speaks to them in his wrath and his fury, and he says, I've set my king. This is my king. And I've set him on Zion, the mountain that Jerusalem is on, which is my holy hill. Could that be David? Yeah, that could be David. So far that branch that I'm out on works. Could it be Jesus? Yeah, most especially. In fact, do you have Psalm 2 open there? Is that what you're looking at? Oh, okay. No, that's okay. I was just, and here it's capitalized. And I was just wondering if in Psalm 2, if it's capitalized as well. Yeah. Verse 6. Yes, it is. So why are they capitalizing it there? Yeah. Psalm 2, verse 6. I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill. And king. Not king? Yep. Yeah. So I think they're, even the translators here are saying this is more than just any anointed one. This is more than just any king. This is the anointed one. This is the King Jesus. And here's why especially. Verse 7 now changes, and this is not the announcer or the how did they call it here? This is not the court official or a royal prophet. This is now the king speaking, the anointed one, or we would say it's who speaking? Jesus. Yeah, King David, or then especially Jesus using his words. I will tell of the decree. The Lord, God the Father, said to me, you are my son. Today I've begotten you. Ask of me, and I'll make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. And so could God the Father have said to David, you're my son, just like he says to us, you're my son or daughter. But even more closely, or even more so, God the Father says to Jesus, what? You're my son. In fact, there's two other places, we can think of at Jesus' baptism. The heavens open, and what happens? God the Father says, this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased. And then at his transfiguration later, you get Moses and Elijah, and then the cloud comes in, symbolic of God, and God's voice from the cloud says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And so even more so, this fits Jesus. And he says, God the Father says to the Son, or even David, you just ask. And what will I do? Yeah, I'll give you the nations. And David, he went out and fought battles, and his kingdom expanded. It was the the biggest the kingdom ever was under King David. And ultimately, is Jesus have the nations as his heritage? Yeah. The ends of the earth. The whole thing is his. Never was David's completely that way. But God the Father says, if you would have asked, I'll give you all this. In fact, you're going to break them with a rod of iron. You think of scepter. Your scepter will break them, and you'll dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. One of the things they used to do in ceremonies after defeating another nation is they would usually make a plate, or there would be a plate on the bottom of the footstool for the king's throne, and they would put that king or that people's symbol on it, and then the king would do what with his feet? He'd put his feet on the footstool, that they were now under him. He had defeated him. And they would also make a clay jar, and the clay jar would have insignias of either the battle or of that foreign nation, and they would bring that before the king and hold it before him on a plate, and the king would take his scepter, and guess what he'd do with that clay jar? He'd smash it in pieces. That I have destroyed the enemy. And that's, you shall break them with a rod of iron, you dash them to pieces like a potter's vessel. That you, king, my king, that I've set on Zion, they're trying to plot against you, but you have authority. You're gonna bust them to pieces. And that's why the Lord laughs, as he knows he's got all the power. So now the official, or the royal prophet, speaks again. And he says, now therefore, O kings, be wise. Be warned, O rulers of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, could be David or Jesus, lest he be angry and you perish on the way, for his wrath is quickly kindled. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. So what should kings and rulers of the earth do, knowing this? Yeah. Don't rebel. Have fear of him. Rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son. Catch the picture there? What's happening in the picture there? And he's kneeling and kissing the feet of the king in submission, right? I was just listening to a history podcast type thing, and it was talking about Julius Caesar and him fighting against the Gauls and the Celts and all that kind of stuff. And he went and conquered the final battle where they conquered them. After they conquered them, the king of the Gallic nation comes on his horse, dressed in his robe and his sword. He comes down, and Caesar is on a throne, and he comes with his horse and goes around Caesar, and then he stops in front of Caesar and lays down his weapons, and then he walks up to Caesar, and guess what he does? He bows down and kisses Caesar's feet, hoping maybe for clemency. He ended up being sent back to Rome and put in the dungeons. But that's what you would do. You'd kiss the king, lest he do what? Yeah, lest he get angry. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but when the North and the South, after the battle, after the end, and I think it was Appomattox, where they had the peace, they signed the peace, and I'm trying to think of who the Northern commander was. Grant, right? Grant was the Northern commander. He sat in a chair, and he had all the officers of the South come before him. And they had to come before him, and he purposely made a thing that they had to walk through, kind of like an arch, what do we call those? well, just like an archway. And in order to come before him, they had to go through the archway. And the archway was purposely short. So in order to come before Grant, every one of the Southern generals, what they have to do? Had to bow down. And that was just the way. Come with fear and trembling, because if you don't, his wrath is quickly kindled. On the other hand, if you take refuge in him, if you turn to him, what will happen? You'll be blessed. There were some Gallic people that sided with Julius Caesar, and guess what happened with them? They didn't end up going in the dungeon. They didn't end up losing their lives because they sided with the winner. And the winner here is going to be the Father and his anointed one, Jesus. Yes. The what now? Often, I'm not sure if we put him as a prophet or not, but I'd have to look. I mean, he wrote Psalms, which maybe could be considered prophetic. Good morning, Shirley.
Good morning.
We are on Psalm 2, almost to the end of it here. And I think, make sure. Yeah, so verse 10 and 11 are the warning. And then what's verse 12? Verse 12 then is kind of the conclusion of the whole thing. Blessed are those. So you kings that are rebelling against the Lord, and you want your freedom, you want to burst the bonds apart, be warned. You better kiss the Son, Jesus, because he's going to be the winner in the long run. Right. Yeah, it does speak plainly to our time. I mean, you almost want to say to some of our leaders, be wise, be warned, rulers, serve the Lord with fear, rejoice with trembling. Oh, that was a nice thunder. Yeah, we must be speaking the right words, Merle says. And so, yeah, these words could fit, or any nation that's, right now, Finland, right, that's going after the church there, or other places. Be warned. Yeah, more so, yeah, the West, I think. What I know of, Bonnie asked about, could they be talking about Russia and Ukraine? Maybe Russia in the sense of attacking Ukraine, but no, at least what he says, now whether this is what he believes or if it's just convenient for him, Vladimir Putin is a strong advocate of Russian Orthodoxy, which is the Russian Orthodox Church. He went into Syria, and while our administration was allowing the Muslims come in and destroy the cities of Damascus and places like that and destroyed the churches, Russia went in and protected them. And he talks very highly of the church in his speech. Now, whether that's just convenient to use religion, I'm not sure. But so I don't see him as persecuting the church. At least he hasn't yet that I've seen, or persecuting God's people or standing against God like some countries are. So, they're not bad. I mean, who did? Oh, okay. Better. Huh. I'll have to reread that, or maybe I missed reading it somehow. Right. 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 And there is a religious difference there. That so just a quick thing. So originally and highly first, Kiev was always the one that the seat of the Orthodox Church, that the high seat, kind of like Rome is for the Catholic Church. And then when the Ukraine was built, then the Russian Orthodox changed to a different site. And part of the reason that the Russian Orthodox Church and Putin want to get Ukraine is to put the church back in Kiev and have control over that once again. So there is a churchly thing there too. But
the church over there pretty much run by the state.
They're close. Yeah, the church and state there. That in fact the Russian Orthodox head kind of really backed Putin on some stuff that was bad. So it's not a perfect church, but the Orthodox, at least what the Orthodox Church teaches, and more so especially here in America, is not real far from Lutheranism. But that's just like Roman Catholicism isn't that far from Lutheranism when you consider the big scheme of things.
What about pastors in Atlantic left become a Greek Orthodox?
Right. That there was probably about 10-15 years ago, there was a number of LCMS pastors that left and went and became Orthodox, which that you don't hear them becoming Catholic very often, or Baptist, or things like that. Anyway, let's get
That explains something. I think of it when Khrushchev had died, and it showed Putin going paying tribute to Khrushchev. I saw him do something of this nature, and I thought, what is that? Because I had no idea they had religion in
yeah, it's the Russian Orthodox Church. Now,
I don't know if it's a sign of, they saw him made some motion similar to the sign of the cross.
and there's official teaching of churches, and then there's what people believe in lots of countries. and what the official church teaches compared to what people believe oftentimes is very different. And that's why it's so important that we have missionaries in Russia. It's not like they understand the gospel rightly, or so. Anyway, Psalm, this is written by the guy that wrote the commentary on the Psalms. He says, this means that when we read Psalm 2, we also see a reference to the final day, when Christ will come again and receive his inheritance, and he'll judge the world. His first coming was the first fruits and points forward to the full harvest. Read in this light, the psalm promises God's people that their God has not forsaken them. No matter what it looks like now, Yahweh is in control of his king, who reigns over us now in grace, and will one day take his rightful place as King of Kings. And it also warns earthly leaders to serve him and to submit to him before the full force of his anger is revealed. Shirley and Marvin, I had said earlier, this psalm is this Sunday, but we're having different readings this Sunday. So all the readings that you're hearing here, we won't hear this Sunday. But this psalm, I'm going to be preaching on the following Sunday, just because I didn't want to miss this psalm. The collect, Lord, and then the petition, we implore you to grant your people grace For what purpose? To withstand the temptations of the devil, and with pure hearts and minds to follow you. That we want to be able to withstand the temptations of the devil and follow Jesus. And then to have that, we need God's grace that gives us pure hearts, pure minds. We'll see how that fits into everything else. Old Testament reading. What's that? I forgot. Collection. Oh, the call. Oh, yes. So the collect last Sunday. Why didn't we do the collect last Sunday? Because it wasn't on the sheet, and so I make the sheets, and somehow I didn't put in the collect, and I'm up there, and I turned to go, because I'm always trying to stay a step ahead, and as I turned to where I'm going to get to the collect, it's like, it's not there. What do I do? And it's like, well, I'll just skip it, because I can't make it up on the fly. And I can't, I could stand up there and say, oh, let me turn and find it in the book. And so my thought was, we'll just skip it and see if anyone notices. Bonnie noticed. A+ Bonnie, you get a star. So it just wasn't there for me to use. No, it wasn't there. Yeah. And the collects in our old hymnal, the previous one, Lutheran Worship, all the collects were in the book. So I could have turned in the hymnal. I would have had time, because I noticed it soon enough that I would have had time to turn in that book to find it. The altar book that's in front of me has the collects, but I don't know, I'm not familiar enough with it to know where to turn quickly enough in that book. And so just because how often do I use that book? It's there. It's not in my office. It's not in my hands. No. I just skipped through a few slides so we can keep going. Proverbs 25. The book of Proverbs, a lot of wisdom sayings, and the slides I skipped over were ones about what Proverbs is like and what it's about. I should probably do the one. No, I didn't. Okay, it's coming. So Proverbs 25 is a collection of sayings intended for the instruction of kings. So there you get the tie with the Psalms, right? With kings and those who would serve them. Scholars have persuasively argued that Psalm 25, 2-27 forms a unit, which is unusual in Proverbs, because oftentimes they're it almost seems like some guy just sat down and thought, I like this, I like that, just throws them together. But the organization, which is unusual in Proverbs, is this. 25, 2-5 is an introduction. It talks about kings and it talks about wicked people. And then section 1 deals with kings, verses 6-15. And then section 2 deals with wicked people. And then you get a conclusion. And then he says, Steinman, the commentator, says, this section is held together by repetition of words from the introduction, 25:2, a verse that's seen between the two, verse 16, which kind of fits right between, and then the conclusion. So in the first verse, it mentions glory. And in the last verse, it mentions glory. And in that middle verse, it mentions honey. And at the end, it mentions honey. We'll see. Chiastic is that X or the ABBA. We'll see a little bit more in a second. This section relies heavily on comparison proverbs, either in the form of similes. I don't know, do you remember similes in high school? Those usually use the word like or as. So similes using kai is the Greek word, that little backwards C with the dots in it and the dots below it, like, or metaphors to make direct comparisons. Among the 23 proverbs in this section, there are 13 comparisons. So lots of comparisons. And one set of proverbs that together form a comparison. The comparison enables the sage to teach either by moving from the well-known to the lesser known, or from a concrete situation to a general truth. So you know this, you're familiar with this, well, it's like that. Or here's you understand this and this is real concrete. Well, here's the truth, that shows us the truth. We'll see how that works. Don't put yourself forward in the king's presence or stand in the place of the great. For it's better to be told, come up here, than to be put lower in the presence of a noble. So what's this proverb teaching? Humility. Yeah. Don't do what? Don't put yourself forward. Don't take the high seat. Jesus kind of speaks the same language, doesn't he? Yeah. Yeah. And so in a way, well, I'll leave that. These verses form one saying that advises against seeking honor for oneself, which is unseemly, or thinking more highly of oneself than one ought. Humility can lead to elevation by others, but hubris, being proud, being prideful, thinking you're something, can only lead to humiliation in front of the king himself. To have an audience with the king was a rare privilege for many people. To be in the king's presence only to be under his scorn and disapproval would be the worst outcome for the privilege one was granted. Does this fit our psalm? Yeah, they thought they were better than the Lord. Let's break our bonds. Let's not serve him anymore. And this proverb says, don't be proud. Be humble before the king. What your eyes have seen, do not hastily bring into court. For what will you do in the end when your neighbor puts you to shame? What's this proverb teaching? Patience? A little bit of patience in the sense that don't judge hastily, don't judge quickly, but find out all the facts before you start accusing someone something. You know what I heard? I heard that there was some woman's car, a member of the congregation's car in front of pastor's house, and it stayed in front of pastor's house all night. You know what happened? You know, right? Yeah. But then you find out that she went to visit pastor and his wife, and her car broke down, and so her car stayed there all night because the car was broken down. And then what do you look like? A fool, right? And so what your eyes have seen, don't bring hastily to court. Don't make. Yes. That could be patience, or it could be don't rush it. Yep. And don't judge other people quickly. I think that's why it puts the word court in there. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to involve a court. It can be the court of public opinion or the court of other people. This verse advises against a litigious mindset. Those who are always ready to go to the authorities for adjudication of every perceived slight may find themselves humbled when the magistrate rules in favor of their neighbor. In the same way, we should not be quick to call our neighbor to judgment before God when we may be vulnerable to that same judgment. Mrs. Fluffernut, Billy keeps calling me a tattletale. What's the problem there? He's tattletaling, right? He keeps calling me a tattletale. It's like, yeah, that's what you're doing. That we should not quickly go to court. Argue your case with your neighbor himself. Don't reveal another's secret, lest he who hears you brings shame upon you, and your ill repute will have no end. Yeah. What's the picture? It's a Norman Rockwell. I love this one.
It's like people disagreeing with each other.
Not disagreeing. Look at the top. It starts at the top left. And yeah. And she's telling gossip to the gal next to her with the bun. And then she turns around and tells the lady with the black hat. And the black hat lady, she turns and tells the guy with the pipe. And the pipe lady tells the next lady, and so on and so on. The one with the, what do you call it? The scarf. She calls the neighbor, and then it starts on the phone, right? And the last one with the phone with the curlers, or the curls, she's got curlers. She tells the guy, and he kind of laughs, right? And it just keeps going on. And the guy at the end of that row tells the guy with the cigar, who then tells the guy in the black hat. The guy in the black hat tells the guy in the gray hat. And what's the guy in the gray hat's reaction? He's pointing to himself in the second to last one, right? The guy's laughing, saying, I heard that you, and he says, me? And where did you hear that? So what's he do? He goes, and which is the lady that he's saying it to? The first one. And he said, and she said, oh, not me. Classic picture. That you don't reveal another's secret, because what might happen? The one that hears you will bring shame on you. And then what's the lady with the tall front hat? She's gonna be ashamed that she started this whole thing. And so if you're find something, don't reveal it. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in a setting of silver. What in the world might that mean? A word fitly spoken is, and there is that comparison, it's like apples of gold in a setting of silver. It's valuable. What's valuable? Yeah, those right words at the right time, the things that fit, they are valuable, just like silver apples or golden apples in a silver bowl. That's valuable stuff. Like a gold, so you get the like again, like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is a wise reprover to a listening ear. I had a hard time finding gold ring, or at least that fit this well. Who is that? Trump's wife.
Ivana.
Ivana Trump. And what's behind her? That's kind of why I liked it. a wall of gold, she's got, and so, like a gold ring or ornaments of gold, like a gold wall or, wonderful gold things. What's like that? And we know that gold is valuable. It's expensive. What else is valuable and special and worthy?
Wise reproof.
Yeah, someone who speaks wise words to someone who will listen. Now, notice it's to someone who will listen, right? It's not like casting, what's the phrase? Have you heard the phrase casting something before something? Casting pearls before swine? Heard that phrase? What's that mean? To cast pearls before swine. Pearls are valuable. So swine is pigs. Why would you not cast valuable pearls before a pig?
Pigs don't know.
Pigs don't know that they're valuable. What's a pig going to do with it? Probably
Eat it.
bury it in the mud. More likely, it's going to eat it. And what value is that? Kind of like my dog. Anything it sees along the way, it picks up, and it's like constantly I'm yelling to her, leave it, leave it. Goose poop, everything. But to someone who will listen, someone who has good ears, is it good to give wise reproof? Yeah. Even husbands and wives, there's times when it's good to reprove your husband or wife, and then there's other times when it's not, when their ears aren't listening or it's not the right time. Tammy and I had a little one just the other day. I forget what it was that I asked her. She started opening the windows in the morning. Not windows, but the shades. We have level blinds, and I usually don't like opening them until the sun is up, because then you can't see in as well. But if you have lights on and you'd open the windows, then people see what you're doing, even if you're dressed. And so I said to her, why don't you wait to open the windows or open the shades until the sun comes up? And she says, you criticize everything I say. I said, whoa. She didn't have listening ears at that time. And so should have I said something like that? Probably not. I didn't know, but here's another as. Like the cold of snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him. He refreshes the soul of his masters. What in the world does that one mean? Cold of snow in a time of harvest. Do you need cold for harvest? Merle, when do you start the harvest? And when is it most likely ready, or when oftentimes?
Well, the first frost.
So you have to have a first frost. So what do you need for a frost? Cold, right? And so the farmer, because if it doesn't get that first frost, what's the problem? Doesn't dry down, and you have to wait and wait and wait and wait, and so you want that early cold one, but then to stay away. But you need that cold to get things ready to harvest. And so it's a welcome sign when that, at least for farmers, at least what I've seen in Nebraska, they're chomping at the bit for the water, the moisture level to drop. And what they were hoping for was just a quick cold snap, so that then they could get out in the fields and start harvesting. And just like that coming of the cold is a faithful messenger to those who send him. That, you send a message out, you want someone who's going to do what with that message? Change the words? You want that messenger to be faithful to your message. And when you know that your message got to where it's supposed to be, you're relieved. It refreshes your soul. So how would that fit today for us? We're sometimes called messengers of God, right? That we're to spread his word. What kind of messenger does he like?
Faithful one.
A faithful one. One that says his word as it is and doesn't change it because they think they know better.
That's the first of our meetings.
Yeah.
Faithful messengers.
The most likely explanation is the wealthy and gracious landowner dispatches a few of his servants to bring some snow down from the mountains to cool and refresh the hot, hardworking harvesters. In the same way, a messenger who can be trusted to complete his mission and adequately represent his master's wishes is refreshing to the authority who is relying on him. So that's another way to take the snow on the mountains, that then you now have some cold, cool thing to give refreshment. There's another one like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts of a gift he does not give. What are clouds and wind without rain? A drought, yeah. Kind of useless. I mean, promising but doesn't follow through. You go through day after day, especially if it comes in July or August, when farmers need some rain, and the clouds, they come and they gather and it gets real windy, so there's a front there, but then nothing comes down. Disappointing. And same thing, someone who says, oh, I'll give you this, I'll do this for you, I'll do it, but then what? They don't do it. It's like that rain that doesn't come. Our gradual, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, who rebels against him and throws off the fetter. No, sorry. Blessed is the nation, what? Whose God is the Lord. The people whom God has chosen as his heritage. By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth, all their hosts. Epistle. Ephesians 1:1-6. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility, gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. What's Paul urging the church to do? Okay, walk together. And walk together how? Gentleness, patience, humility. Yeah, and not just love, but bearing with one another. What's that mean? Putting up with things because you love them. You have to do that with family.
Mhm.
Is the church a family? Yeah, and that's what God calls us to do. Don't put yourself forward and think you're the best and be prideful, but rather be humble. Don't take the high seat. Take the low one. Be gentle. Don't be spreading rumors about each other. Be patient with each other. Don't rush into court. Oh, wait, these are kind of starting to meld together. But instead, do what with each other? Bear with one another in love. Bear with one another. Is that easy? Well, that's why it's called bear, right? It's like you're bearing a burden. What? Yeah. I forget what the word of the day was. I get a word of the day in my email each day to try and from Merriam-Webster's dictionary, they send you every day an email if you sign up for it. And the reason I like signing up for it is I read the word and then it gives you the definition, but then it gives like an example of its use. But what I like is the bottom part where it explains the meaning of the word. And I think it was onus. And that onus comes from the word cart. And that something's onerous, that it's burdensome, it goes in the cart and it's heavy like the cart, and someone's ornery is burden, and so you kind of see how words come together. It's kind of fun for me, but I deal with words all the time, so that's why. But bearing with, the load, taking the load of other people, and doing all that for what purpose? Yeah, to maintain that unity of the bond of peace. And it's a unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Then this epistle goes on with Lutheran verse here. There is one body of Christ. All of us are part of that. And one Spirit. That's going off of that unity, right? That there's how many bodies? One. We are all brothers and sisters. We're all part of one body, one Spirit, just as we were called to all kinds of different hopes. Nope, one hope that belongs to our call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of us all, who's over all and through all and in all. There's two words that are used over and over and over again in that paragraph. One. It's like one body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God. What's it trying to emphasize with that word? Only one. Yeah, and what's the Spanish word for one? Uno, right? Which comes from the Latin, which is uni, which is the form of this word right here, unity. What's unity? Yeah, the oneness, that we be eager to maintain that unity, that oneness of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
Those are all right hands.
No. And the only reason I chose it is it's like, they're all different, but they're all what? Together. And what brings them together in that picture? The cross of Christ. And we have a unity, and our unity comes not by what we do, but it comes in who we are. I don't know if you thought about that. That we are unified regardless, and God makes us unified. We don't make ourselves unified. We are called to oneness. We are made in oneness. We all have the same baptism. We all have the same Lord. All that stuff is not something that we do, but rather that God creates and gives to us. That our unity as a church is all God's. And so what's he call us to do? To become unified? No, to do what? To maintain it. That what, you've been given this is yours. Don't what? Don't throw it away. Don't let it fragment. Don't let it break apart. Yes, one baptism. Then you would throw it if you met some guy and got married and he wanted you to get rebaptized because he was Baptist and said you had to be baptized. Yeah, they won't acknowledge yours. Were you baptized? Yeah. And so do you need to be baptized again? We'd say no. This verse shows us that there's one. Yeah. And all this stuff, is this our doing stuff? We've talked about that already, right? It's all God's doing. Is baptism our doing? No. And the reason the Baptist church doesn't recognize baptism of infants is because they don't believe that the infant can do what needs to be done in baptism. So they're, in a way, they're making the baptism a doing of the person rather than the doing of God. That's why if a Baptist came to our church and had been baptized, do we baptize them again? No, because who did that baptism? God did for them. And so we recognize it. So they see it more as something they're doing, which is against what this is talking about. Same thing with the charismatics. They divide baptism. They say baptism of water and baptism of the Spirit, and that they talk about two baptisms. But this verse says how many baptisms? Just one baptism. And so the word one is over and over again. The other word that's over again.
All.
It wouldn't be right. It probably would not, to be rebaptized would not be good, right, and salutary, but if you did, it's not good to murder your neighbor either, but can you be forgiven of it? Yeah. Is it unforgivable? No, it's not. Yeah. Yeah. Jack, remember Jack Lynn? He's back in California. There was a Christian group on campus that he had been attending, and they asked him to be a leader of it, because he's pretty smart and knows his Bible and all that. And he had asked me, should I do that? I said, well, be careful what they're going to ask you. And sure enough, he became a leader there. I'm talking about Jack, Peggy. And he became a leader there in this Christian organization. And he started wanting to teach what he believed and what Lutherans believe. And they, no, you can't talk about that. You can't. And they eventually made it so hard. They said, you got to teach these things that we're giving you. And he said, I can't teach that. That's not what I believe. And so they ended up asking him not to be a leader anymore. But anyway, so sometimes it's hard that people stick with their guns against something that's scriptural, and we have to stand. And so a person that would give into that, I would say that they're doing something that's against what they believe, against what God says, that'd probably be called a sin. And is that an unforgivable sin? No, it's not rejecting the Holy Spirit. So.
Some churches have what they call dedication.
Right.
That's not a baptism.
That's not a baptism. It doesn't give you anything because there's nothing in the Bible that's, then we would baptize them because they had not been baptized. Yeah.
What if you get into the hospital?
Right. So
you don't know.
So in an emergency baptism, if baptism happens emergency in a hospital, we don't rebaptize. If we don't know that the nurse baptized the child, and that would happen more years back when there was Catholic hospitals with Catholic nurses, that sometimes they'd secret the kid away and baptize it and not even say anything to the parents. Would it be wrong for those parents not knowing that their kid had been baptized by the nurse? No, that would be good and right for them to do that. And so then if someone is, like, let's say it's done rightly, and the baby is premature and dad does it, or I rush to the hospital and I baptize it, then do they come back into church and do we baptize the baby then? No, because it's been baptized. Then there's a service of an acknowledgement or a recognition of an emergency baptism. So the other word that's used a lot in this on this slide besides one? All, Father of all, who is over all, and through all, and in all. So there's not just a oneness, but that oneness includes all. It's all encompassing of the church. I'm skipping through gospel reading. We tried to figure out what the picture was earlier. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to dine in the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were what? Watching him carefully. And behold, there is a man before him who had dropsy. Can more be said from a biomedical point of view? Dropsy, an almost obsolete term for general edema, refers to bodily swelling due to an excess of fluid. Not a disease itself, dropsy is an indication of a malfunction in the body, especially congestive heart failure or kidney disease. Already in antiquity, the paradoxical fate of a person with dropsy was proverbial. Nothing is as dry as a person with dropsy. That was the parable, and I'll explain it in a little bit, or maybe this will. Signifying the insatiable thirst of one whose body is already retaining too much fluid, also known in antiquity as the metaphorical use of dropsy as a label for money lovers, the greedy, the rapturous, that is, for persons who share in the very condition which the Pharisees are indicated in the Gospel of Luke. So, dropsy, have you ever heard of congestive heart failure? Yeah. And what happens? You get more and more fluid around the heart, and it makes the heart really hard to pump, and it causes difficulty with the heart because of the fluid. And that fluid doesn't just gain there, it also will gain other places. And where does fluid love to go? Downhill. So where is it going to end up most likely? Down your legs, right? Or if you have kidney disease, you know, that your kidneys aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not filtering out the fluids, putting them into the bladder. What happens with the fluid that's not going out? It begins to build up in the body. And where does it like to go? Down to the legs. What's that? In the lungs, yeah. Yeah, I know my dad, he had congestive heart failure at one, or had, you know, that problem. And along with it was kidney difficulty. And so all three were going at the same time. He had his kidneys failing to take the water off, which was causing the heart problems and the lungs problems because they can't do what they need to do. And then if you gave that person, my dad, what's it called, to get rid of the fluids? A diuretic. If you give them a diuretic to cause them to pee it out, that not only is that would be a good solution, but the diuretic hurts the kidneys, you know, and so it's one of these, you know, to help the heart of the lungs, you need the diuretic, but you do the diuretic, you hurt the kidneys. You help the, you know, it's a real tough thing to get out of when the person gets those three. So that's dropsy, and oftentimes the person with dropsy, even though they have lots of fluid, guess what they're thriving? Fluid. They want to drink. I think that's one of the symptoms, or one of the early signals that someone has diabetes, is that they're awfully what? Thirsty. You know, they'll drink and drink and drink. And is that good for them? Not always. Anyway, so there's the Greek word, hupo, or we would say it, or hupo, I should say, hyper What's hyper? Too much. You know, so like if someone that's hyper active, they have too much energy or activity, and it's picos, water, hyper water, that they have lots, they want to take a lot of water and they're collecting a lot of water. That's the word for dropsy. The condition of swelling called edema today is caused by water retention in the body. It's considered grotesque because of the disfigurement it causes. One who had dropsy was considered unclean according to Leviticus 13:2. Yes. So, yeah. So it talks about money. So I'm going to throw this out for you. So most people who have quite a bit of money, is that enough? No, they got lots of money. They're filled with money. And what do they want? More money. And then they get more. And is that enough? No, they want more. And so just like this person's got all this water, what do they want? More water. And does the more water help them? No, it just makes it worse. They want more water. And so the tie is that, you know, Jesus in a way is saying to these Pharisees who were lovers of money or mammon, you know, he was teaching them through the person with dropsy. Jesus responded to the lawyers and the Pharisees saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? He asked them a question. What's their response?
Silent.
Silence. Why? Yeah, both. It's a catch-22. It's a question that they can't escape from. And so then Jesus, after they're silent, you know, what's he do? He goes and he heals the man with dropsy. And he said to them, which of you having a son or an ox that's fallen into a well on a Sabbath day will not immediately pull him out? And they could not reply to these things. You know, so he gives them an illustration. Your son falls into the well. He's drowning in the well. What are you going to do? Leave him because it's a Sabbath? No, you're going to pull him out. Why? It's the loving thing to do. It's the caring thing to do. It. You love your son. You want to save your son. You want to do well for your son. And so he says, same thing with this guy with dropsy. You think you're trying to catch me, and you think that healing on the Sabbath is wrong, but you do things every Sabbath day because they're necessary. So he told a parable to those who were invited when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit in the place of honor. Oh, this sounds familiar. Lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him. And he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this person. And then you'll begin with shame to take the lowest place. We ran across this where? Proverbs, right? And Jesus riffs on it. He takes it and takes it a step further or explains it even more so. But when you're invited, sit in the lowest place so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher, and then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. So is Jesus here teaching us where we should sit when we go to weddings? Is that his purpose? Bonnie says we should all sit in the back of the church because of this. Is his concern with where we sit in meals? Now, he's doing one of those similes or metaphors, just like this, that it's better to be humble rather than to be prideful. Then verse 11 gives you the punchline, right? So the teaching isn't so much about where you sit at the table, but everyone who exalts himself and thinks he's something, sits at the high places and criticizes or tries to throw off God or whatever it might be to burst the bonds asunder. That person, what's going to happen to them? They exalt yourself, you'll be humbled. But you humble yourself, you trust in the king, you follow the king, whatever, however you want to put it. What happens when you humble yourself? He exalts you. Come on up higher. And so the real teaching is not, and so, and is that part of it where we sit? Yeah, we don't want to overstep our bounds. That's a good thing. But the important thing isn't where we sit at tables. The important thing is, how do we view ourselves? Do we exalt ourselves or do we humble ourselves? And that kind of fits in with the epistle, right? That you're kind to others and you try and maintain that unity rather than trying to be above everyone else. Hymn of the day, seek where you may to find a way. Nope, we're not. So I think I'll just leave it and go to the collect. We're way due. Any questions? A lot of stuff. We'll get it next year though. That's the kind of cool thing about the one-year lectionary is all these ties that sometimes you see it from this perspective and other times this way. And I mean, because these slides, I didn't make this year. I made these the year before or the year before, depending on the year. And we use the same ones, but are we learning every time? It's like, wow, what's edema? I don't remember from last year. And if you did remember, then oftentimes you'll catch something different. So the cool thing about the one-year series. Let's pray together. Lord, we implore you, grant your people grace to withstand the temptations of the devil and with pure hearts and minds follow you. The only true, through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord, lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Kind of threw me off. What's in there that's not normally in the doxology? The only God, the oneness from the epistle. Well, thank you all for coming. Max did well. He was quiet. We had Max here, Shirley and Marvin.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh.
Very good.